In the late 80s and early 90s, you knew a movie was going to be full of tank tops and explosions if the movie poster had big red text. Here are my secrets to achieving peak VHS vibes, all without using plugins or stock footage overlays. Plus, I'm going to teach you how I link all of my colors together so that if the client at the last minute decides to change the color, I don't have to go all the way through and change 500 layers individually. New composition, I'm going to type Vengeance and we'll center align that. I'm using Dharma Gothic CX Bold. That is an Adobe font, so you can get that for free. I actually want to apply my anchor point expression to center the anchor point. I want to do like a little cutout, kind of like the Mission Impossible poster or the Speed poster. I might just make this as a new solid. You could make it as a shape. You could also mask it, but I'm just going to make it as a new solid. I don't like shapes very much. They bother me in the way that they naturally scale. So I'm just going to use this and bring that down. That's approximately good. I'm going to call that cutout. And so at the moment, that's just a black line, which will look stupid when I make it transparent in the future. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make this silhouette alpha. Yay, it worked. So now it looks like that. So that just means that if I was to put other text under there or other things, I can move the cutout independently of the text and I can just copy paste it. But you can mask it. It's not going to make a huge difference in this case. Okay, so now let's color this. Instead of coloring the text itself and going over and selecting a color, I'm going to make a color control. So let's call this color control. So I'm just going to switch that off because it's just a control layer. We'll go up to effects, we'll type in control and you'll find it, color control. So drag that on there. So this is where we select our color. Instead of going full red, I'm going to go kind of like a slightly dulled red, not too hyper saturated. You can't see it yet because it's just a color control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a color overlay just so I can see it as I'm editing it. I'm going to call this layer color look. And we're going to change it to a multiply because the text is white. And then I'm going to get a color fill. So I'm just going to type in fill, double click there. Don't need that control there. So then this fill is red, right? Let's make it blue just so we can see what's going on here. We want to use this little transparency matte. It's just affecting the text and the cutout. I'm going to link this color control to this or the other way around. So one way you can do it is you can go to your color control layer and lock it so you can always see it. And then we can scroll down this color control, effects, fill, and here on the color, we can pick whip it to that and bingo. Now that color look, whenever I change this color control to a different color, say I go, scroll through, you can see it's changing the color look even though that color control's underneath. So I'm going to hit cancel there, but I don't want that to go all the way through because of some of the effects I'm going to do. So that's just so we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to change this to a guide layer. Now guide layer gives you this little symbol here, and what it means is that when we export it, so say for example we were to take this text edit and drag it into a new comp, you can see that that red is gone because the red in this case is only a guide layer. Okay, so you're with me so far. It's kind of convoluted, but I've done it this way so that we can make more changes and edits in the future. All right, so now we've made this little fancy pre-comp. We're gonna name this pre-comp text effects, and we are going to again go back to our text edit. We're gonna lock our color control so that we can link it. We're gonna go in here, we're gonna grab a fill, and then we are going to pick whip that fill to this effects color control to get the exact same red so we're consistent the whole way through. But what we want is another copy of that. We're going to call that text light effects main 1 because there's going to be 4 of these layers and there's going to be a Luma Matte. So we start with this. I'm going to just get rid of that. It's just less confusing. So right now we've just got the fill layer in there. Now to make this little light sweep intro animation, we're going to use CC plastic, something that you've probably never used before because it's archaic, it's old school. So first off, let's turn off this top text layer. Now you can see already this kind of plasticky looking outline starting to happen. So let's have a look at some things that we can change. Maybe go with 26.5 or something for softness. That's just what I found looked good. Obviously, that's a little bit pedantic. We're going to take the height down to 5. Now, this is the surface bump. There's also the light, which is separate. So now you can see that this is kind of this bump, this edge is less pronounced. So let's then change the light so we can see this a little bit better. Let's go from 100 to 500. Very pronounced. Let's change the distant light to a point light. And now we can see that wherever it's pointing, still lighting up the entirety of the text, which I don't want. So let's go into our shading and let's take out all of the ambient light, all the diffuse light, and even all the dust just for good measure. So now this is giving us a pretty cool look. Already looking very die-hard. Let's change this light height to say 30. And now when we move this around, if I go fit, if I move this around here, you're just going to get a little bit of it lit up. Down here, you're starting to only get these lines at the bottom. We want to animate it from right to left, and then we'll duplicate the whole process and do it from left to right at the top. So I'm just going to drag this across to here, and I'm going to set a keyframe for the light position, which is up here. I'm going to hit U to show all keyframes, and I'm going to go across to maybe 4 seconds, get another keyframe, scroll it all the way across. I'm just going to take the edge off that with Alt close square brackets. So we call them square brackets anyway. I'm just going to shorten that. So now we can already see the start of this kind of line. But the thing is, this text is still black, even though it was black on black. And I want this to be completely opaque, just in case we want to put it over footage or a different color than black, so it doesn't show through. So to do that, we're going to duplicate this pre-comp and make a Luma Matte. Before I do that though, I just want this, because it's kind of jumpy, I want it to just fade in a little bit at the start and the end. So I'm going to hit T for opacity. I'm going to hit Shift Control arrow, which just jumps forward and back 10 frames at a time, something I use all the time. And I'm going to just give it 0 to 100, so a little fade in, and the same at 4 seconds. We're going to go from 0, 10 seconds back to 100. So now it fades in and out. And so I'm just going to duplicate this like so. In the this one above, I'm going to change it to just say Luma, and I'm going to say this is still 1 so that I can keep track of everything. I'm going to delete this fill because I'm not going to need it. And then what I will do is I will use the Luma layer as a track matte. I don't want alpha matte, I want to change it to Luma Matte, so just click that little button. The only thing that's showing is this now, even with the transparency on, which is what we want. I'm actually going to drag this fill below the plastic effect so it's just red instead of giving us those kind of white highlights, which is kind of cool if that's what you want, but in this case I'm just going to do that. And so now I'm going to do the same thing for the top, except of going right to left. I'm going to go left to right. I won't bore you with all of that. Let's just skip ahead to when that's done. Speed up your vintage video creation by downloading this project file along with 40 other vintage titles via the link in description. Nostalgia is a retro title template collection for After Effects and Premiere Pro that'll save you hours or even days to send your project back in time. So our little sweep is looking great so far, but it's really kind of digital and harsh. This CC plastic doesn't really give you a very soft look. So just these edges. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a blur as a glow. So let's go layer, new adjustment layer. We'll drag that underneath the main text and I'm going to say glow. But really it's just a Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to go maybe all the way up to 20 and see what that looks like. It's a lot more moody, but it's maybe a bit too kind of hard to make out what's going on. So to make it look more like a glow and less like a blur, let's just back off the opacity a little bit. So now it's still showing through, but it's kind of giving us this diffused look. We want, at the end of this animation, as it fades out, for the main text to fade on. So it kind of ends up looking more like this. So instead of just a normal opacity, let's kind of fade it on with a mask. So I'm going to select a square mask, and then we're just going to just draw that out roughly. And I'm going to kind of have it start from, let's put in a keyframe for the mask path. Start from up top and then slowly kind of fade into the center of the composition. What I want to do is let's invert that so that it reveals the text coming down like that. And even that's kind of cool, but I'm feeling like I might feather it a whole lot. So let's have that animation start at maybe like, 10, 15 frames in or something like that. And then go to a little bit after the little glows have finished glinting. So maybe a second later, maybe a little bit further, we'll see. So now it kind of moves over that 5 seconds, but let's go ahead and feather it. I'm just going to start by feathering it 1,000. But then I'm going to keyframe the feather at the end and the start, so it's going to go from 0 to 1,000. And I think I might even animate some opacity as well. So I'm going to just go from 0 to 100. It's really shaping up now. So I've just adjusted those keyframes just a little bit. Just pretty much grabbed and dragged them up just a tiny bit in the middle. And added some easy ease keyframes just so that it kind of slows down just in this bit here, and then as it gets to the edge of the text and kind of eases into that move. So it looks something like this. And you can finesse that and ease it even more so that, the ease at the end. See, that little bit there feels a little bit abrupt to me. So you can finesse that and work on that depending on how, and then also how quick or slow you want this animation to move. 5 seconds could be way too long for what you need it, or maybe it's even more mysterious and it goes for like 7, 8 seconds. You can amend that in here in this section, with all of your keyframes, or because we're about to pre-comp this, you can drag it there instead, especially if you give this composition a higher frame rate. But let's drag this composition into a new composition. So this is called text effects. I'm going to drag that into a new comp, and we might call this one final. So we're going to start to work on the final look of it, just to give it a little bit more retro flair. So to get the 80s look, we're going to definitely need some glow. Now you can use glow from, After Effects. Say you push that radius up. The problem is when you actually look at the transparency grid, and you can't really see it right now, but you actually get kind of like a dark shadow. Because I want to be able to use this on footage or on different colored backgrounds or whatever it might be, instead of using glow, and also depending on the color, instead of using glow, you can use deep glow from Plugin Everything, which is amazing. But if you don't have that, we're going to stack up blur layers and turn them into a glow. So I'm going to duplicate this a few times. Let's just go through and name them. So I'm just going to take you through and show you exactly what I've done for this look, and there's a lot of tweaking that can be done with this. So I'm just going to use a Gaussian blur in this case. A fast blur can also be quite a good way of doing it. So for glow 1, I'm just going to do a massive blur. So we're going to go 600, so we're getting a lot of color in there. I'm actually going to change the blending modes on all of these to lighten, and then I'm going to also mess with the opacity on this. So this is looking a little bit too aggressive, so say I took that down to, say, 50% for now, and we can see how it looks later. So now it's a lot more subtle. So let's go glow number 2. So we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to grab that blur, and instead of 600 on this one, we're going to go incrementally downwards. You can start from the other side and go incrementally upwards. It doesn't really matter. So that is still really aggressive, so I might bring that way down to like 20%. And what we're looking for is a nice smooth roll off from the letters out to the glow, because if you just use the After Effects native glow, you don't get a very good roll off, which is not how a glow would actually work or react. So let's go with another blur. This time we went from 200, so let's say this one's 100, maybe like 20% again, just for some sense of subtlety. Number 4 here, we're going to go with maybe from 100, we're going to half that to 50, and see, you can see where it is there, but that's, you know, too obvious. Let's zoom in a bit. That's just a little bit too obvious between off and on. So again, I'm going to bring that down to maybe, say, 50%. Still want a bit of it in there. And then glow 5 here, let's change that to, say, really small, 15. So it's just kind of these edges. And even that at 100 looks pretty good. Yeah, I might just keep it at 100. So it's really just, I mean, I'm hoping you can see it's just kind of softening the edges there as well. So that's probably what I want it to look like. So that's without a glow and that's with the glow. Pull out. So the difference there is just that glowy goodness. All right, so I think though I want to add just another layer on top here. Let's call it Text Effects 2, because this one down here is called Text Effects. And instead of lighten, I'm going to go normal, and I'm going to change this 15 to 10 Gaussian blur, and take the opacity down to 50. I mean, that's so subtle. It's almost not worth me explaining what I just did, but it's just bringing a little bit more definition back into the letters, so it's not completely blurred. But that's neither here nor there. But you can kind of see this kind of softer fall off from the letters going out. And so then if I wanted it to not be quite as large, you do that. You can kind of move down the line and see how the whole thing is blending together. Anyway, so that's our glow. Now, sometimes with VHS or, you know, other print formats, you can end up with a bit of a color shift. One way to do that is a plugin. Another way is to create 3 layers that have an RGB split. But in this case, I'm going to kind of do it a bit of an interesting and lazy way, similar to what you would do for chromatic aberration. Let's call this Color Shift. And I'm going to use the, what have we got? Shift channels. And I'm just going to turn off red and turn off green. And so now it's just completely blue. Let's make sure that's 100% so you can see what's going on. So, I mean, even that's kind of a cool look if you were to kind of do something like that. But let's make this an additive blending mode. Now we've gone all pink with it. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to shift it just left or right so you can see that kind of color change. So I'm just going to shift a little bit one way. And these lines are really harsh on it, so I'm just going to add a little bit of blur. So let's go 30. So now you've just kind of subtly got this change in the edges over here being more yellow and these being more blue. And then because it's making it quite pink, I'm just going to back it off to, say, 50% as well. All right, next up, we're going to need an adjustment layer because we're going to start to look at this kind of VHS look in terms of how it moves, its distortion. We're going to use a wave. So I'm going to call this a wave, and we will use a wave warp, which, you know, looks like that when you start, which is ridiculous. Let's make the wave height 1, maybe the wave width will be like 600. I mean, this is subtle, so it's going to be hard to really show you. Maybe I need to make the wave height bigger so you can kind of see that's what it would be. And then instead of 90, we want 0 because we want this wave to kind of move up and down. And let's make the wave speed, the wave speed that it has originally is like really noticeable. So we want to slow that down a whole lot. So instead of, that, which is ridiculous, let's go down to like 0.2. I'm going to pin all the edges on this. Let's make this a whole lot more subtle and bring it back down to 1. Now you've just got this really subtle wave, and I know you can't really even see it. If you wanted to go more VHS, you could, change the wave height to something higher, like say 3, and now it's going to be a lot more noticeable. See, now you can see it, but it kind of looks more like it's moving almost like a flag. So yeah, you can make it more overt or more subtle to suit what you're going for. So the next step is we need some jitter, which you would get in, say, like 35mm film stock or something like that. So we're going to create a new null object. I'm going to call it jitter, and I'm going to link all of these. Actually, you know what? Let's link all of these, pick whip them, parent them to the text effects at the bottom, and then parent the text effects, the original one, to the jitter. And so you've probably seen before someone using wiggle, but in this case, instead of wiggling the whole thing, I'm just going to wiggle it up and down. And so I'm copy pasting this from, again, my expressions Google sheet, which you can get in the description, but I'm going at 32 by 1.5. And so what it's going to start to look like is hopefully something you can see, but I'll zoom in a little. Let me just zoom in a little on that so you can see it kind of bouncing. Can you see that? You got the wave and the bounce now. It's, again, you can mess with the amplitude or the frequency to make it more aggressive. I feel like we need to use wiggle again. So let's make another solid comp size, black. We're going to call this one flicker. So that's called flicker. Let's take the opacity down to 0. And then we're going to add we're going to alt click on the stopwatch to add an expression. And we're going to type in wiggle, maybe 10.4. And so now we've got a really subtle flicker as well. So now if I zoom in, you can see the jitter, the wave, the flicker, the glow, the chromatic aberration. It's all working together. All little subtle additions. Everything is incrementally adding to the 80s-ness. Okay, so let's do some 35mm grain. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do this. I would obviously suggest that you get some actual grain stock and use that. But if you don't have any, one way that you can make some grain is by using noise. I might call that noise actually. And we're just going to go up here. We're going to type in noise, double click. Maybe we'll go 3. I'm not going to use color noise in this case. And that noise, that grain is just going to help it look more like film. It's going to mess it up a little bit. And then on top of this, and we're still going, I know we're still going with adjustments. I'm just duplicating that adjustment layer again, and we're going to add some more blur. What I often do with these looks is that I blur them and then sharpen them. So I'm going to use a Gaussian blur this time. We're going to go with maybe 6. So now it's quite blurred. And then I'm going to jump up here and use sharpen. You can also use unsharp mask, which gives a different effect. And then I'll maybe sharpen that by like 600, like quite a lot. And what you start to see is kind of weird artifacting, especially with the grain and the noise. Let me show you before and after. So all the glow, you can see it all there. And then the blur and sharpen, it just kind of makes it really crusty. Let me remind you that this is where we're at now, but this is where we started. So you can see a whole lot of difference here. And also, if you find that the color shift and all that has moved your color too far, you can go into an adjustment layer and use curves or hue adjustment and scroll it back around to what it originally was meant to be. So this is looking really good. Obviously, like, it still works on a transparent background, which is really cool. So you can put it over footage or any color you want. In this case, I might just put it over a gradient background. So here's one I prepared earlier. It's just a solid that I've stretched that has a radial gradient ramp. The colors are pretty much, you know, black on the very outside and then kind of like a subtle gray blue on the inside. If I pull that up, you can kind of see what's going on. So I'll just bring that down a little bit. So from the one I prepared earlier, the only difference really, other than the little bit of Japanese down here that kind of animates on just with a fast blur with horizontal only, is these texture and VHS looks. They're just two pre-comps, this and that, and then that's duplicated 3 times. So the 16mm texture is just kind of fractal noise and stuff like that, and the VHS displacement is just noise with Venetian blinds and that kind of thing. I would highly recommend buying a 16mm texture and a VHS texture, but these come included in Nostalgia so that you don't have to do that. My name is Grant M. Fletcher. If you've enjoyed this, then why not subscribe and also watch one of these videos to further your retro creation quest. Jesus loves you, so do I.